So Pokemon has come out with an official Pokemon Ecology book entitled Pokeecology, which is one part awesome and one part rude because I wasn't involved and like, come on. But also I'm not a Japanese professor like everyone else involved in this project, and I don't even speak Japanese. But that is why Pokesuutamie and I have teamed up to translate and discuss this book in its entirety. These videos will be split between our two channels, so make sure to check out each of our channels to catch each video that we release on the subject. And we've already put out the first video discussing Pokemon swimming techniques. We've also enlisted a bunch of great artists to help bring this project to life and recreate the illustrations found in this book. And now without further ado, let's dive right in and discuss some more aquatic Pokemon ecology.
Specifically, we will be taking a look at how some aquatic Pokemon move through the water. The book starts by explaining how Piplup are not great at walking, but rather slip and flop around. And since Piplup tend to live along the north coastline, they are skilled swimmers capable of diving into the water for over 10 minutes at a time in order to gather food.
Piplup may not be great at walking in general, but I bet they are great at walking on ice, unlike us humans. The reason we have such a hard time walking on ice is because our weight is split between our two strides. One leg is behind us and one leg is in front of us, making each leg try and support our own body weight at an angle that is not perpendicular to the ice surface, and this causes slippage. Penguins, and likely Piplup, have figured this out by keeping their body weight directly on top of their legs while they walk and by having extremely short, waddling strides.
As for Wailord, as we all know, it's the largest Pokemon. But despite their massive size, Wailords can dive to a depth of up to 3,000 meters without needing to come up for air. When they are on the water's surface, they breathe through their blowhole. And before diving, they take in deep breaths. This is what allows them to stay underwater for longer periods of time.
Yeah, get out of here, Eternatus. We have the true largest Pokemon to discuss, and that is Wailord. 3,000 meters is an insane depth to dive down to. There is one species of extant whale that dives this deep, and that is Cuvier's beaked whale. The famous sperm whale also dives fairly deep to a depth of around 2,250 meters. Both of these whales are toothed whales, meaning that they actually have teeth like a dolphin instead of baleen like a blue whale. And these deep dives are foraging trips to feed on cephalopods like squid and the occasional deep-sea fish. So what in the name of Arceus is Wailord doing down that deep? Also, isn't this thing built like a balloon? Wouldn't deep-sea pressure just squeeze Wailord until it's like the size of a whaler? Wailord appears to have something in between the teeth of a toothed whale and the baleen of a baleen whale. Its Pokedex entries make it sound like it feeds like regular baleen whales, eating large amounts of prey in one gulp, or even feeding like humpback whales, where groups of Wailord may get together to drum up large amounts of prey at once for feeding. In humpback whales, this is called bubble net feeding, where whales work together to essentially herd fish into large groups using a stream of bubbles, and definitely sounds like a Pokemon move.
Wailord, use bubble net.
So maybe Wailord is feeding on some dense population of unknown marine Pokemon down there, or maybe it needs a specific mineral from deep sea soils? Alternatively, maybe Wailord is doing something with deep sea vents. Wailord has a length of 14.5 meters and a height of maybe 5.8 meters if we use this article written on Tom Rock's Math as our information source. With an incredibly low body weight of 398 kilograms, and for comparison, a similarly sized humpback whale weighs at least 22,000 kilograms, which is a cool 55 times heavier. Wailord is less dense in air, which really proves its float whale Pokemon category. But if Wailord has a skeleton and presumably organs, how would this even be possible? Enter deep sea vents releasing hydrogen. Sea vents are fissures in the seabed where tectonic plates are moving apart and are most commonly found in volcanically active areas. These vents release water heated by magma and the Earth's core, as well as a variety of chemicals, one of them being hydrogen. A lot of deep-sea marine organisms already utilize deep-sea vents, with many being completely reliant on them for energy through a process called chemosynthesis. Like instead of getting energy from the sun, they get energy from the chemicals released by these vents. I don't think Wailord is using them for energy, but maybe instead using them to offset the weight of its enormous skeleton. Hydrogen is lighter than air, and much like helium, when a balloon-like object is filled, it will cause the object to float. Historically, hydrogen was even used to fill blimps, but because this gas is highly flammable, it has catastrophic potential for such vehicles, and the explosion of the Hindenburg in 1937 is a great example. Wailord could dive down to possibly feed on deep-sea organisms, releasing gas as it dives, and then stop by a hydrogen vent to fill up on gas when it needs to return to the surface. This would cause Wailord's weight to appear much lighter than it actually is, and may explain its bizarre stats in the Pokédex entry. This video wouldn't be complete without one tinfoil hat ecology hypothesis, so let me know what you think about it.
Now the jellyfish Pokemon Frillish. Although they may look cute and harmless, that's actually far from the truth. They wrap their flail-like arms around their prey, paralyzing them. And then they drag their prey all the way down to the deep sea, as far down as to around 8,000 meters.
Since we were talking about the deep ocean, how crazy it was that some whales can get down below 2,000 meters, immediately following this up with something that can dive to 8,000 meters sounds fantastical. But this one is also based in reality. The giant phantom jellyfish, also like what a name for our IRL analog of a ghost-type jellyfish Pokemon, is one of the deepest jellyfish in the ocean and is commonly found in the midnight zone and twilight zones of the ocean, and typically pops up around 6.5 thousand meters. So Frillish's depth isn't too far off. Just imagine if something that doesn't really have that strong of an ability to swim drifts down another 1,000 meters, we have the depth found in this translation. Also, for what it's worth, the color of this jellyfish is pretty darn close to the color of female Frillishes. Pokesuutamie also stated that Frillish paralyzes its prey before dragging them down into the deep, but a quick look at its moveset determines that this is a lie. There's not a single electric type attack in this Pokemon's move pool. So that might actually be the most unrealistic fact about Frillish here, and I just think that's funny.
When we look at Tirtouga, if we judge by the skeletal structure, Tirtouga looks as if it would be capable of diving to depths of approximately 1,000 meters. Naturally, as Tirtouga dives deeper, the water pressure becomes higher. In order to achieve this safely, a sturdy skeleton is essential.
That's a pretty fair depth for something like a sea turtle to dive to, but I'm not sure that a rigid skeleton is the answer to living in the deep. This paper suggests that deeper dwelling snailfishes have reduced skeletons and allow them to be neutrally buoyant in the deep, but still allow for moving and feeding. And just thinking about typical deep sea animals off the top of my head, it certainly seems like squishier body styles seem to dominate the deep. This would allow their bodies to act somewhat like stress balls with the changing pressure and would allow their bodies to flex as they move up and down the water column. In fact, this seems to be the exact reason why leatherback sea turtles, with their flexible skin-covered osteoderms instead of a hard keratinous shell, are able to dive the deepest out of any turtle. This allows their body to expand when inhaling and compress when diving due to the pressure. So apparently Tirtouga has evolved a much different approach.
Now, if we look at Ducklett, a Pokemon of the sea and sky, we learn that Duckletts are better at swimming than they are at flying. Using their webbed feet, which help them swim underwater, they dive under the water and happily eat their favorite moss.
Ducklett is mostly just a duck, so I don't have a lot to say, except this book shows that they dive and forage underwater, but their body type suggests a different feeding style. In the wonderful world of ducks, there are two kinds, dabbling ducks and diving ducks. Dabbling ducks are those that flip upside down to forage, but ultimately stay on top of the water column. These kinds of ducks sit higher on the water and have centrally positioned legs for paddling around and walking on land. This is the kind of duck that Ducklett most closely resembles. Diving ducks, on the other hand, have more compact bodies, sit lower in the water column, and have legs positioned near their rear so that they can propel themselves underwater. I guess being a water type gives you certain advantages over water to make up for their floaty, dabbling body type.
Now taking a look at Sealeo. Sealeos form herds, and they live together on floating ice. A Sealeo's front flippers are so strong that they can break ice. And when it comes to food, they will dive into the sea up to 5 times a day in order to hunt and catch prey.
Another Pokemon that is just like its real-life inspiration, Sealeo and many seals form social groups, take breaks from foraging to rest on floating sea ice, and break up ice to maintain breathing holes. And if you watched our last video, another polar Pokemon, Empoleon, uses its steel-tipped wings to maintain these same kind of holes to enter and exit the water.
Moving on to Azumarill. Azumarills are capable of spending an entire day underwater. They can do this because they first take in large amounts of air and then store it. Azumarills also use their long ears to distinguish between different underwater sounds and to monitor their surroundings.
While holding its breath for an entire day is quite the feat, there are a few animals that come close. Loggerhead sea turtles can hold their breath for up to 10 hours, but this is usually done while resting, and sea turtles have the advantage of being poikilothermic, both things that reduce metabolic rate and therefore oxygen consumption. Being poikilothermic means that an organism's body temperature fluctuates with its surrounding environment. This is in contrast to endotherms, who generate their own body heat through their metabolism, like birds and mammals, and ectotherms that regulate their body heat through behavioral means, like most reptiles. Most aquatic animals are poikilotherms because water is generally a thermally stable environment. Air temperature fluctuates much faster and is usually more drastic than changes in water temperature, and it is generally harder to manipulate your temperature through behavior without leaving the water. Azumarill seems like a mammal-like Pokemon to me, which would normally mean it would be endothermic and have a generally high metabolic rate. But there are always exceptions to this rule. Since the mammal that can hold its breath the longest, the Cuvier's beaked whale, can only do so for a few hours, maybe Azumarill has found a way around its breath constraint through lowering its metabolic rate or breathing through its skin like an amphibian. Maybe it can respire through its giant ears or something, but those are also useful for hearing underwater. Instead of evolving whiskers, an acute sense of smell, or electroreception, it appears that Azumarill has evolved precise underwater hearing in order to search for prey. Modern pinnipeds also have hearing that is better adapted for underwater, but they don't really use it for foraging. But in the grand scheme of Pokemon ecology, I think an aquatic, sound-based hunter is pretty believable.
In the case of Finneon, they stay near the sea surface during the day, but at night they delve into deeper waters. During the daytime hours, Finneons expose the pink of their bodies to the sunlight. Then at night they swim into deeper, darker waters and use the stored up light to make their tail fins glow in order to attract prey.
I actually have an entire video on Finneon and Lumineon, which kind of surprises myself sometimes because these Pokemon aren't usually ones that I think of or that take up a lot of space in my brain. But they are pretty cool nonetheless. Finneon hunts using bioluminescence, literally meaning living light. Pokesuutamie stated that Finneon will dive into the deep ocean at night to do its hunting, a place and a time that bioluminescence really shines. It's difficult to find a hard and fast number for this statistic, but some estimates say that almost 90% of deep sea animals are bioluminescent. In an environment that sunlight doesn't reach, creating your own light might just be the best way of communicating with other organisms down there. Whether it be for attracting mates like the dragonfish, or scaring off predators like the dragonfish, or attracting prey like the dragonfish. It turns out that when you can produce your own light and you live in complete darkness, you use that light for a whole lot of stuff. So we know that Finneon uses it mostly to attract prey, but think of all the other stuff it could be using it for.
I don't know why, but anytime I played Pokemon Gold when I was a kid, 99% of the time I had a Tentacool in my playthrough team. And talking about Tentacool and 99%, 99% of a Tentacool's body is made of water. Tentacles will blend in with the water to become hard to see in the sea. They also tend to dry up after getting stranded on sandy beaches when the tide goes out, but they always return to normal when they are in contact with water again. And as we all know, tentacles are poisonous. But perhaps lesser known information is that tentacles are actually not strong when it comes to swimming. They instead search for prey while drifting along the surface of shallow seas.
Tentacool's entire entry in this book could actually just be written about jellyfish. Except I'm not sure that they survive if they get stranded on the beach out of the water, so good on Tentacool for figuring that one out.
Moving on to Phione. When the sea temperature rises, Phiones inflate the floating sacs on their heads and float together in groups along the surface of the water.
This Pokemon is very similar to the Manowar, a siphonophore that also uses an inflated sac called a pneumatophore to basically sail the ocean going wherever the wind takes it. Just like this animal, Phione likely isn't a strong swimmer and must rely on wind currents to move it around the ocean so that it can feed on plankton or small fish. Unlike the Manowar, I believe that Phione migrates. When the sea temps rise, like Suutamie mentioned, probably coincides with a seasonal shift. Phione then inflates its pneumatophore to travel to a certain area using the winds, which seasonally shift due to changes in the heating and solar radiation of the Earth, the same reason why we even have seasons in the first place. Its Pokédex entries even state that it always returns to where it's born. Not sure how it does that since it's not a strong swimmer, but maybe oceanic Poke-Earth winds can facilitate this. So my next question is, where is Phione going and what are its secrets?
We looked at Azumarill earlier. Now let's look at the pre-evolution Marill. A Marill's tail is full of oil. This means that the tail acts as a flotation device, and at the water's surface only the tail will float. Marills use their tail for balance while diving underwater, and because oil is less dense than water, eventually means that a Marill will always float back to the surface of the water.
I have always loved Marill, and I remember seeing this Pokemon for the first time released as a kid and thinking that its tail was just so cool. Just like other aquatic mammals, Marill probably produces a waterproofing oil that it not only spreads over its fur to insulate itself and keep from getting waterlogged, it likely stores or maybe even produces this oil in its tail. The next question is, why? Marill is effectively an aquatic skill claw with its tail situation, sending the body down towards the substrate, gathering food, and then retracting itself back up for air. Its body isn't really built for diving or swimming fast, so I think that Marill would have to forage in pretty shallow water. Think something like dabbling ducks that we discussed before. Both have big round bodies that can't swim underwater very well, but are really good at floating. It even seems like their diets are similar, in that they're both generalist omnivores. Marill's Pokédex entry talk about it eating submerged vegetation, going fishing, and even foraging in quick-moving streams. I think it makes the most sense that Marill feeds on foods that are easy to collect but have a long processing time. This way it wouldn't need underwater mobility and would need a reliable way to float in water while accessing the food that it gathered. Think of something between a rodent and a sea otter, which is actually pretty visually perfect for Marill. I think it drops down to the substrate, gathers plants it has to chew, or invertebrates it has to break open, then slurps itself back to the surface using its floating tail, where it can rest and get to work preparing its meal.
Now, a fossil Pokemon from ancient times, Omanyte. Omanytes store air in their shells. This is what makes it so they can float and move in water. The overall ability to float is decided on the density of the body. If higher than water, it sinks. If lower, it floats. Omanytes can even adjust the density of their bodies by using air which has been stored within their shells. They also have 10 legs which they wriggle in order to swim.
Omanyte is one of those Pokemon that is almost a perfect copy-paste of its real-life inspiration, but surprisingly enough, there is a key difference between how Omanyte and the real Nautiluses control their buoyancy. Like Suutamie stated, Omanyte control their buoyancy by storing air inside their shells. Air is less dense than water, which would increase the buoyancy of Omanyte and allow it to swim or rise to the surface instead of being stuck on the ocean floor. Nautilus do something similar, but instead of storing air in their shell like an inner tube, Nautilus move water in and out of the chambers in their shell by osmosis by pumping ions like sodium and chloride out of the chamber. This causes the water to flow from an area of low solute concentration to high solute concentration, which then causes the gas pressure inside of a chamber to lower, and the gases dissolved in the body fluids will bubble out into the chamber, filling it with said gas. This increases the buoyancy of the Nautilus and causes it to rise in the water column. So yeah, both Omanyte and Nautiluses use gases in their shells to control buoyancy, but Omanyte seems like its shell works a little closer to something like an inflatable life jacket. But maybe this is a more approachable way to explain osmosis to 10-year-olds. Because I went to college and I've taught these classes in college and I still kind of have to look this stuff up before explaining it. So yeah, maybe air or gas in a shell works just fine. And then moving on to Omanyte's second entry, it appears that Omanyte does not use jet propulsion like real-life Nautiluses. Nautilus tentacles are pretty small compared to Omanyte's because they are mostly used for sensory purposes and for feeding. Instead, much like a Sharpedo or an underwater jet ski, Nautilus suck in water and then shoot it back through a siphon known as a hyponome, and this allows them to travel through the water. And that wraps up the rest of the aquatic Pokemon entries in Pokécology. We've already begun working on our next video, so stay tuned for more. And a big thanks to Pokesuutamie for spearheading this project and doing all of the translations, and a big thanks to all of the great artists that have really helped bring this project to life. And make sure to check back in the future for Pokemon Ecology Deciphered Episode 3.